We are live. What do you know? Hey, everybody, I'm David Kimball, the host of the Other Side of Grace podcast and Movement podcast. And today I am joined with my friend, Judah McNeil. What's up, man?
Hey man, yeah. I want people got to check out your podcast, the Movement Podcast. You interview people that have been in the mission field, right?
Yeah, well, I think I've kind of expanded it to just hearing people's stories of
Mm,
where God has led them in their life, whether it's through recovery or whether it's their mission or ministry experience. It's really just about hearing stories.
I like that. Yeah. And I'm on a podcast with my dad every Thursday, usually around 10. It's called Cloudburst, where we just talk about I don't know things that we find interesting, mostly about the
Yeah,
Bible, Christian
it,
life.
I love listening to those, man. Your dad is full
Oh,
of wisdom
good.
too. Like,
I know he is. It, you know, ultimately what it started out as and what it's going to be is like a huge catalog of archived wisdom from my dad. It's
mhm.
amazing. I was thinking about it might be too much. I was thinking if I had to watch, like I was thinking after he passed away, it's gonna be like really emotionally charged. It's gonna be hard to watch any of those. We have almost 100 now videos,
Mm.
and I don't know.
I think it's
Maybe.
awesome though because my dad died when I was 21, and
Mm,
I don't really have anything. In fact, we uncovered a
mm,
box of his old written sermons um, the other day when we were cleaning out stuff. And my
wow.
mom set to the task of digitizing them, and
Nice.
but yeah, it's just like oftentimes I like wish we had audio recordings of his sermons or things like that. Um,
Yeah.
so it's cool that you're having that time with your dad to just talk through things,
Yeah.
and you have it archived like that.
Yeah. Yeah, you're gonna get me emotional. This is not supposed to be an emotional podcast. This is supposed to be a fiery
Yeah. um,
political video.
so for everyone watching, and if you haven't noticed, we have a bunch of very bright, colorful vote background. I guess those are the little lapel pins things, but we're talking about voting today because everybody wants to do that, right? Um,
Well, it
so
started because you said you had an idea. What was you? I forget what you said
yeah, so
for discussion.
the idea is by is not voting, not loving your neighbor. In the
Hmm.
sense that Jesus in Matthew 22 said, we have two commands. The first is to love the Lord our God with all our heart. The second is to love our neighbor as ourselves.
Hmm.
So if we choose to not vote, are we sinning in the sense of we're not loving our neighbor? And I kind of
Hmm.
wanted to just dive into that idea and flesh it out, have a little conversation about it. Um, so yeah,
Hmm.
that is kind of that simple.
Okay.
Um,
Well,
so
so what? So it's just as simple as that. I mean, how is it loving your neighbor to vote? I mean, you're saying it's our command to love, but how are we loving our neighbor by voting?
yeah, I think that's what I want to get into is like, what does that
Okay.
actually mean? But before we dive deep into that, I just want to read the scripture for our listeners, if
Okay.
that's good.
Yeah, yeah.
So in Matthew 22, verse 37, actually verse 36, Jesus is having a debate with the religious leaders. And so 36, the religious leaders say, Teacher, which is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important: love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so that's the command. So, but how, I mean, again, how does it come? What is it about voting that is loving towards your neighbor or my neighbor?
Yeah. So when I think about that question, I have to think about um, what do the candidates promise to do?
Hmm.
And if I'm voting, obviously I got to vote for whichever candidate I think is going to. Um, let me back this up. Oftentimes when we vote, we think very selfishly. What is this candidate going to do for me? How's it going to help my wallet?
Mm.
How is it going to help my job situation? How is it going to help my general life improve? I think that's a general mindset we all have. Um, but I think what this command that Jesus is talking about is that we need to actually be thinking about, is this candidate going to actually improve my neighbor's life?
Hmm.
And is that going to help my neighbor even more than myself?
Hmm. Well, I guess my difficulty with that is how do we know one way or another what candidate will help our neighbor? And so I guess when I was thinking about this, and actually I've been working on this idea of like, of course, my brother Paul McNeil does not vote, and he's very against voting. He's more of a volunteerist, and I've grown sympathetic to the idea of not voting in the sense, I guess, that though I have to say, you know, I vote. I'm very political. I'm very pro Trump. I voted for Trump already. If this will be my third time, and I it's I but I've been working on this idea of what is the argument. What would the argument be for me if I decided not to vote? And I think for me it comes to two things, two verses. And that is the Matthew 22:21 verse where Jesus, the whole context of, or the whole passage about him going, Christ going down, sending them to get a fish, getting the coin, render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's. I find that to suggest that there are two distinct spheres of responsibility for us as Christians, and that is of
Mm-hmm.
the Christian, our Christian responsibility, and that of the state. And of course, we're not part of that sphere. And in one sense, right? Like in one sense, you can interpret this to mean, you know, just do whatever it takes to function in that sphere. We're in it, not of it. And even if you just have to go get a fish, you know, of course, he's
Mm-hmm.
talking about paying taxes. He's not talking about voting, but it kind of, I, so that's where, to me, we're not required to vote. We are required to pay taxes. So if he has to go out and get a fish to pay taxes, I don't see Christ, you know, going to the voting booth. That's the first verse. So first, what is your response to that? What do you think about that?
Um, so my mind is blanking, but I'm pretty sure Paul talks about, civil authorities, how we need to respect our civil government, because essentially the idea that he's portraying is those people are put there by God. They're ordained by God to be in that position, whether you agree with their stance or policies. Like you even go back to the Old Testament where um, Cyrus was said to be ordained by God to essentially take over the Jewish kingdom at that time and bring them into
Mm-hmm.
exile. But that was an appointed leader that God set in place. He even uses kind of this messianic language of that. And so this idea that, Jesus kind of even, I would say, when he says render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, he's almost saying the same thing. He's saying, I've appointed Caesar to be that ruler. And, if he's asking you to give this for taxes, then you need to give that to taxes. So I would say that Jesus would definitely respect the civil government that is in place. Would he challenge it? Well, he definitely, Jesus, I don't think ever challenged the Roman law. He challenged the religious leaders constantly. And I think that goes back to the idea that Jesus didn't come to challenge and to set up a physical kingdom, right? He came up to establish his spiritual kingdom first. His return at the end times, I believe, is when he's going to actually set up his physical kingdom. But before I get lost in my thoughts here, so yeah, there's the respecting of your civil government and the leadership that God has put in place. I think the second thing that is important is that, you said, I don't see Jesus going down to the voting box. Well, I would disagree with you, because if Jesus is really about loving your neighbor, and he knows, and he would know better than you and I would know which candidate would do what, he knows that there's going to be a law that's put in place that's going to help someone. I would think he would do that, right? I mean, this is metaphorically speaking, right?
Yeah.
But if Jesus is really preaching a gospel of love here, then wouldn't he also work within the political system to help?
Well, two things about that. The first thing, my visceral reaction is, well, that is sort of why I don't like politics, and particularly don't like liberal politics, is because I don't believe we help people. I don't believe that it is efficient or good or right to help people through the machinations and systems of government. That I actually find it to be maybe even sinful to think that we can outsource our loving responsibility to the government, so that, like, and I'm not saying you're saying this. I know that yours is a little bit nuanced, but I think that it could easily slip into this idea of, well, I help my neighbors by pushing a button for one person or another, and sometimes that, like, I see that on the left side of the spectrum, especially the far left, being substitute, like pushing a button for a policy or candidate is substituted for my actual getting involved and my actually directly giving it to the people that God has shown me needs it. So instead of giving my neighbor love, I am giving help to somebody, that I don't even know. I think I know, maybe I know. And they tell other people to do something, and they pay this guy, and eventually gets back to my neighbor, like there's something, that extreme on the left is very concerning to me. And I guess I'm just worried. I hear a little bit of that in what you're saying.
Yeah. So I think, the interesting thing to me about politics is, I kind of view this whole sphere as a circle, right? And you have the extreme right here, the extreme left there. But if it's a circle, they're kind of like the extreme left and the extreme right are here, and you have everything kind of going around. So eventually they kind of meet each other to some degree. That's maybe not the best, philosophy, but I kind of see a lot of that happening in politics, because, you have your extreme socialism on the left, right? And then you would have what is opposite of that, which would be, I don't know,
The alt-right.
Yeah, the alt-right, whatever the alt-right is.
Extreme right. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that would be like controlling other people so that they. What would that be? That would be like that would be segregating people away, segregating people that you don't like away. Making very
Right.
stark boundaries around communities.
Yeah, I mean, and both the extreme right and the extreme left do that, which is why I think they're almost the same thing. They just have slightly different like political agendas behind them.
Mm.
Um, but to go back to what you were saying, so for me as a conservative, um, born and raised, I'm very much in line with a lot of conservative parties. I wouldn't consider myself extreme alt right, but I'm definitely to the right. Loving my neighbor would mean I'm going to vote for a candidate that is going to do whatever they can to remove government from the daily life of people so that the local community, which is I believe how our Constitution and forefathers set up, can get involved in the day-to-day lives. So who's your local community? Well, your churches, your local state government, your city government, and individual people and organizations can get in there and actually do the footwork that they see needs to be done in that location. Because the federal government, it doesn't know what Western North Carolina needs, obviously. It doesn't know what, Lizard Lick, Utah needs or whatever. It's like they have their responsibility is to protect us through military and to provide guiding laws that govern, in general. So it then comes down to the states and the local governments and the communities, which would be the churches, individual businesses, individual people that need to be doing that work of figuring out what that community needs. So that's when I think of loving my neighbor, I think of especially on the presidential election, I would think of what candidate is going to actually support the removal of government, federal government.
Well, I guess, and again, I vote, and I pretty much agree with you. The devil's advocate, the side of me that has sort of gotten sympathetic to the idea of not voting, says, well, isn't that sort of counterproductive? So that aren't and even looking back, I've been very interested in politics since I was young. My dad's very interested in politics, my family, and I've watched it, and I've watched myself, and I've watched, I've voted since since I was 18. And I think what I've seen is that instead of the candidates that we've gotten, and even when I've been happy or when I've been sad about the candidates, consistently, it's just been more government. So it's almost like I feel like that I have been lured in this idea that I could reduce government by participating in government, and instead all I did was add another cog to to the huge machine. And or this morass of vines, I just kind of put my hand in there. I don't know what the analogy is, but it doesn't feel like adding something to this monster is the right move to reduce this monster, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and I don't think there's an easy fix for that, what you're talking about, because we've had years and years of what I would just say is cronyism, of corrupt politics and of this just forceful push towards the left, which is asking for bigger and bigger government. And, um, you know, I think post World War II kind of didn't do us any favors with that, because I saw that's when a lot of these big government agencies were founded by the political parties that were in office. And now they're institutionalized, they're not going away. I mean, it would take a lot to get them to go away. So it's kind of like we're kind of stuck in some degrees where we are for the moment, unless we get a really big civil push. And I think
Well,
that, yeah.
and that's where my thinking began, because I thought, how are we going to claw back any of this? How are we going to reduce any of this monster? And like you said, it's been institutionalized. Well, that's when the idea came to me that maybe I should vote for Kamala. And because I really think she is a great example. Because I mean, it goes back to part of the reason I originally voted for Trump is I wanted to vote for a bull in a what do they say, a bull in a china shop. I wanted him to go in there and start wrecking things, and he did for the most part. But he also, the problem I see with voting for the the best candidate, he's not perfect, is that like someone like Trump he's going to make that monster bigger. He's going to add to government.
Yeah.
As much as he's going to drain the swamp or whatever, he's going to write his name on those checks going out to everybody, that added to inflation. People blame Biden for the inflation. Well, Trump put his name. He put his name on the checks. And,
the last three presidents have added.
Yeah.
Or the last probably
I would say
10 presidents,
Yeah. But so that's where I got the idea I started thinking about was like, maybe I should vote for Kamala because she is terrible, and she will be terrible. It will be you won't be able to, people will see it clearly. We'll see the effects of government clearly, and it will cause pain. And I really don't think that we can reverse things without pain. And now my dad, I spoke a little bit to this to my dad, and he was horrified. And so, but because, I mean, his argument was, well, we don't want to, it's going to cause death, ultimately. They say for every 3% the economy shrinks or something about unemployment shrinks or grows, so many people die. There's a direct correlation. But my argument is sort of that, well, I just feel like they're going to one way or another. Like I feel like Trump is sort of a Band-Aid. In some ways, he is going to help things. I do believe I have a whole list of, I think it's grown to like 100 things he has done to help our country, policies that he's instituted that, like most people agree, are good for us. And, however, he still grows government. He's, it's the sort of thing like, you've heard that thing of like, what is it? A hammer wants to, is always looking for a nail type thing. And even though he's not a politician, well, he's a politician now. I mean, he's definitely a politician now. Even though he's a businessman, I feel like, he's still a hammer and is still going to look for nails. Like just by the virtue of being in that system, he is going to grow it. And I think this term more than the last term, probably, because he is more of a politician now. Anyways, that's getting specifically into the candidates, but in general, I guess my mind goes to the Romans. I had it written down. Where Paul talks about suffering that leads Romans 5:3-4, that suffering produces perseverance, Perseverance produces character, and character hope. And that's not to say I want to. I kind of do want to vote for suffering. I do want to vote for destruction.
Well,
I really do.
Let's because I think that's important.
Okay.
That verse you just quoted. It's really about the discipline of God, right? Because when God disciplines us, He doesn't do it out of anger. He does it out of love, right? Mm-hmm. He wants us to sharpen something in our life that He knows can only happen through the fire. Just like gold can only be refined in fire, sand can only be made to glass in fire. So this is another danger of the word love, is that oftentimes it's been twisted and perverted by the left to mean flowers and good feelings and everyone gets along. Well, that's not true. Love is often hard and painful because true love is self-sacrificing. And true love also means you're willing to do the hard thing, go through pain to eventually come out to something better, right? Yeah. So what you're saying is, let's vote for suffering. That kind of sounds hard at first, but if you put it in the context of, no, I'm willing to do the hard thing so that your life can ultimately be better in the end. That's a beautiful thing.
I'll take that. Yeah. I do. There is an aspect of it, though, like the Lord chastens those He loves. Romans 13, and but I guess I want to go back to. So I brought up the idea of voting for Kamala. I'm not going to do that. It was just a thought experiment. I can't bring myself to push that button. No, but
I understand.
But I do. But it does push me a little bit more towards sympathy towards not voting, in the sense I want to read this. You probably heard have you heard the story of the Chinese farmer who says maybe?
Maybe. Why don't you read it for us?
Okay. I like to come back to this story, and I'll just read kind of a shorter version of it. Once upon a time, there was a poor farmer who lived in a village. Mm-hmm. One day, his horse ran away. And hearing this, his neighbors came over to express their sympathy, saying, "Oh, what terrible luck." This guy it kind of reminds me of Job. And the farmer simply replied, "Maybe. Maybe it was good. Maybe it was bad. We'll see." The following day, the farmer, a few days later, the horse returned, bringing several wild horses with it. The neighbors came over again, exclaiming, "Oh, how wonderful! You're so lucky!" Again, the farmer responded, maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. We'll see." Following day, the son tried to ride. One of the wild horses was thrown off and broke his leg, and the neighbors came over again and said, "Oh, we have so much sympathy for you. It's how unfortunate." The farmer said, "Well, maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. We'll see." A week later, soldiers came through the village, conscribing all able-bodied young men to war. But because the farmer's son had broke his leg, he was spared. And the neighbors congratulated the farmer on his leg. "Oh, your son didn't have to go to war." But again, the farmer said, maybe it was good, maybe it was bad. And it goes on like that. And it continuously, it's a very long story about how we never really know, the effect. And actually, it was your brother who said this once, so I'll try to weave this in. This is a famous saying, but I first heard your brother say it, is that the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with anything? But it's like, I thought of it, particularly in fantasy football, is like you can be right. Everybody can be right on a long enough timeline because the way life goes back and forth, it
Hmm.
remains irrational longer than the timeline is bigger than our ability to participate in it.
Right.
Um, longer than our little fraction of a effort of our participation. And so that's when I think about voting, I think, you know what, like particularly when you said that about it being an act of love, I thought maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We'll see, because what if you vote for a candidate and they're so good? Say they're so good. He's huge. He's wonderful. He's great. And things get so good that the opulence of our country causes, I really believe that like the whole trans and LGBT movement comes out of the success of our country. We're able to do these crazy things because of how successful and how little we suffer. We're looking for ways to suffer. We're looking for ways to complicate our lives. Um, can you imagine somebody like eating, somebody in a country where they have to, every day they're this close to death, worrying about whether they're a man or a woman? It's like, come on, that is such a privileged, uh, first world problem.
Right. I agree with you completely. The suffering in America is laughable compared to the suffering in other world countries. And I bet we could talk to any one of those immigrants coming across the border. Sorry, my
Uh-oh.
camera is some reason it likes turning off. I think my camera overheats after like 30 minutes.
Oh
But
yeah.
um, but yeah, we could probably talk to any immigrant coming over the non-existing wall and ask them, how does life compare in America to what you came from? And I bet they're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, this is. I honestly do think they probably think it's great, and they're probably laughing at
Oh
us.
yeah. I mean,
You
that's why they
know,
come. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, it is an interesting question, and I think that's why I wanted to have a conversation is because I'm kind of the same way. It's like, yeah, I totally see how it's loving your neighbor, but at the same time, is it? Because there's so
Mm.
much that goes into it. And like the immediate, like, okay, this candidate is promising lower taxes. The other one's not. So, well, lower taxes is going to be great for me. It's going to be great for my neighbor. They're going to be able to go, you know, provide for their children more or go spend whatever they want to do with it. It's America. Um,
Mm.
it sounds great, but like you said, is it creating suffering? Um, and does there have to be suffering to love? Because I think there are different types of love that can be incorporated into this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because obviously if someone's
Yeah.
struggling, hey, they're working. You have two parents who are both working. Some of them are working multiple jobs just to make ends meet, and lower taxes will relieve them of that immediate stress. That's loving their neighbor. That's loving them. um, Now in the long run, what they do with that extra money, I can't control, right? So they could go decide to spend it all on booze or entertainment or whatever and not actually take care of their children or whatever. I can't control that, but I can help. Theoretically, I can help provide an opportunity that maybe they can have a little extra cash in their wallet and hope they use it for the best.
Well, I guess where I've come more your way in this conversation. Oh, he's gone.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Where I Oh, okay. Where I've come more over to what you're saying is maybe we can attenuate the idea a little bit more. Oh, I took you off just so I don't have to look at the Elgato.
Oh, okay.
Are you back? No, that's all right. Um, like maybe a subtle version I can get on board with is when I go to vote, that I vote out of a sense of love, out of a sense of my neighbor. Not that I'm voting, that my act of voting is an act of love, but that in the act, that, it does challenge me to think about my neighbor when I'm voting. But I guess the difficulty is that doesn't really, it doesn't challenge this idea. I guess it doesn't really help come to a better understanding of what helps and what doesn't. Because I'm reminded of, I remember people in my church were saying, or well, it was actually, yeah, I think it was people in my church were saying, by wearing a mask, by uh, social distancing forever, you are loving your neighbor. And I fundamentally disagreed with that, in the sense that it could be that I'm loving my neighbor by doing that. However, it also might be that I'm not loving. It might be something else where I'm playing into a kabuki theater that actually hurts people in the long run, rather than, by wearing my mask, getting my shot, social distancing. I'm playing into a system of, like a destructive system, rather than actually doing something that helps them in love. We
Yeah.
both hit it.
That's the problem with having two people in control. I agree with you, and I think that's where we as Christians have to really prayerfully discern what we believe. One is the truth, and I mean, I always think that truth is found at first in the Word of God, and then we bring it into real world application. How does that apply to me and my circumstance? Um,
Yeah.
and so, like, for the mask thing, that's a great question. Like, I do know people who are seriously immune compromised, and if they were to get certain diseases, that would be fatal to them, right? But that's not necessarily the general public. And, you know, I see these videos of people in their cars wearing their mask when they're by themselves. And I'm just like, I scratch my head at that. And I'm like, what? you
Yeah.
know? So, like, I think it goes back to that idea of, when in scripture it says, if eating certain foods or drinking causes your brother to stumble, don't do it, right?
Mm.
So if, like, I know I'm around someone who might need a little extra protection, sure, I'm going to be respectful of that, just because I love them, right? Whether I agree if they need that mask or not, if they say, hey, could you wear it, I'm going to wear it because I love them, right? But I think
That
okay, yeah, what were you going to say?
I just wanted to say that I think that comes directly. I mean, that actually comes from. I don't know if you were referencing this one, but um, both Titus 3:1 and 2, and Timothy 1:2, when it says, "Remind people to be subject to rulers and authorities, be obedient, be ready to do whatever is good,
Mm-hmm.
to slander no one, to be peaceable and considerate, and always be gentle towards everyone." That's the Titus one, and
Yeah,
Timothy sort of echoes that. It goes along with what you're saying, kind of brings it into what you're saying earlier about a responsibility.
right. Yeah, and so, if our church was one of the first churches that, as soon as the mandate to lift the mask was officially over, our church was like, we threw him off, and we're like, we're back to normal. I mean, we didn't even quit services. We did whatever we could to make sure we could still meet and worship. And so like, I love that mentality. It was like, I, as a Christian, am not going to live in fear. And I'm not going to live in fear because I have the Spirit of God in me, and he's the Spirit of life. He's the Spirit of freedom. He's the Spirit of healing. I mean, why should I live in fear? And, Timothy says, or Paul says in Timothy, whoever wrote Timothy says, we haven't been given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and self-control. And so like, I talk to people all the time who, they're professing believers, and they're like, I have a fear of death. And I'm like, why? I don't have a fear of death. Like, in fact, I work roadside safety, and we were putting cones on Interstate 85 the other day, these big barrels. And like, I'm literally 2 feet away from giant 18-wheelers that are speeding by me 80 miles an hour. And my supervisor says, "Are you nervous?" I was like, "No." He's like, "I don't know that I like that answer, but okay." Because, like, if I die today, I know my family's going to miss me. I know I'm going to miss opportunities with them, but I also know where I'm going. I also know I'm going to see them again. And so it's like the whole COVID thing, I just didn't fear. Like, if I got it and died, okay. If I didn't, okay. And I think that's how most Christians need to adopt that mindset of like, my life is in God's hands. There's nothing I can ultimately do that's going to extend it. Because when he calls me home, he calls me home, even if I'm in perfect health.
I completely agree. And I kind of, to bring it back to voting, I think that is kind of why I think it's okay for those, for those that don't want to vote. I think I can really sympathize with it, and I think it's okay, because no matter what we vote for, typically people go to vote in fear. I'm voting against this. I'm voting against that. I want to protect this. Even fear for your neighbors, like I don't want my neighbors to suffer this. And it goes back to that, that proverb about the Asian farmer who says, maybe we'll see,
Right. So to take your point and this whole idea of fear, we do vote in fear. And I can tell you there's been a lot of fear. If Trump wins his election, there's going to be da-da-da-da-da-da. It's fear, right? If Kamala wins this election, there's going to be da-da-da. It's fear, right? But scripture says there is no fear in love, because love casts out fear, right? And that's totally ad-libbing that verse. But if we...
Sounds right to me.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds right. So if we're voting with love of our neighbor, it means we're not voting for fear, which means we can see past the fear mongering of, oh, if you don't vote this way, such and such and such and such. I just saw a advertisement for campaign ad, against abortion. And the campaign ad is like this lady who's pregnant and she's on the floor, she's bleeding, she's the husband or boyfriend calls the doctor. It's like, oh, if you don't get her in here for an abortion, she's going to die. And then a Republican congressman comes out of the shadows, is like, I'm sorry, you voted me in office, and she can't have an abortion. And don't worry, you'll still have opportunity to have kids, just not with her. And it's like,
oh my gosh,
what? Is a terrible playing on nothing but fear, right?
Yeah.
But as a Christian who's not living in the spirit of fear and who can cast out fear, I can then go and say, okay, well, let's look at the real issues here. No one's going to allow someone to die just because there's a bill on the floor, right? That's ridiculous. We're going to do everything we can to save lives. But what's the greater issue? Because I mean, we're not going to get into the whole abortion topic today. We're already past time, but it's like, how can I actually show real love, which means a willingness to suffer, a willingness to go through pain, a willingness for discipline, and not be fearful about it. And I think that's where it comes down to. And you said it earlier, it's this mindset of going to the pole and not thinking only about myself, but actually kind of having your neighbor in mind.
Yeah, that's what basically you started by framing it that way, and I think I was just repeating that. We have some people watching. I do want to acknowledge David Roberts, longtime friend from Illinois. Hey, David. He said, "Let Vivek take a chainsaw to the." I was a huge Vivek supporter. Actually, I didn't actually become this time around. I didn't really get on the Trump train till they started, the 32 indictments against him. That was really
right.
I was more of a Vivek, Robert Kennedy Jr. Supporter. But let's see. David also says love is hard to define in our culture. Unfortunately, so is truth. Salt and light works a little better with discernment or in discernment. Yeah, I agree. It's a good word, David. Discernment. I think having discernment, and I think it's kind of what you're saying when, not necessarily, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not saying we need to vote or we don't love. I think what you're saying is when we go to vote, we should do it with discernment out of a place of thinking of our neighbor rather than out of fear and self-preservation and self-enrichment.
Right. I think that's ultimately where I've come to land on that idea. And yeah, I will say, you quoted my brother, and I love my brother. We should have him on this show sometime. But as far as I know, he doesn't regularly vote. And I've mentioned to him before, like, I honestly, if you don't vote, I really don't think you should be able to complain or have much say in the situation, because like you didn't do anything, when you had an opportunity, you didn't necessarily do the one civil thing you could do. Now he disagrees with me a lot on that, and we've had some good debates, but it is, that's another good question. It's like, if you don't vote, do you really have the right to complain for the next 4 years about the situation?
Well, he's actually listening.
Yeah, I see that.
Watching, and he said he voted for RFK this time.
Yeah.
How were you able to vote for RFK? I'm an RFK supporter myself.
He was actually still on the North Carolina ballot that I had, I believe.
Oh, okay.
So even though he's dropped out, right? But
yeah, there was something that where the libs kept him on the ballot so that he would take votes away from Trump. But I do disagree with that, but we could have a different podcast some other time. I get what you're saying, but
yeah, and that's not like a firm, like, hard etched in stone, but I do kind of think it's funny, like, you're complaining about the way, taxes are or the government's going, but yet you decided not to vote to voice your opinion.
Well, the only thing I want to say for that, and this is, I was talking to my kids yesterday about, I was challenging them. They were yelling at me for speeding, and I was challenging them about the thinking about the benefits or the detriments of speed limits and enforcement. And I do want to challenge. There is something in me that is revolted, or wary. I'll say wary, better word. Wary of. Sorry. wary of depending on the system to help us. And I do always want to come back to, in other words, when you say, well, you missed your only opportunity, I do want to challenge that or push back against the idea that our only way to make a difference is to vote. In fact, I am sympathetic to those like James and Paul who say that maybe that is the weakest way we can help. You know, I mean, when you look at the Bible, there are a ton more ways. You know, in scripture and in Christianity, we know that there are way more ways to change our society, to change even our politics, outside of pushing a button for one person or another. And I do think that there are, I mean, often I used to do, and might start it again with Ford Sue's, the reverse redaction, or actually this was on the Surfing Violinist podcast. We talked a lot about the art of maneuvering. Not that we want to be manipulators, but we want to maneuver. And I feel like as men, as humans, men and women, as humans, we can manipulate, we can change, we can alter our surroundings, particularly the closer the better, you know, from our immediate surroundings out, with maneuvers, with, you know, and ultimately by looking where God is working and joining that, not with our civic duty, but with our, like you said, love, and self-sacrifice in our immediately helping our neighbors, walking over there and helping them, rather than pulling a lever for some bureaucrat to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, your only option or only chance, that word "only" was a poor choice, because I totally agree with you. Like, yes, I think that's an important way we can voice, on a national level, voice our opinion. Is it the only? No, because we've been talking about this whole time the importance of loving our neighbor, and like you just said, that daily one-on-one interactions with our neighbor can be way more impactful. So yeah, I do think so.
And not just on a personal level. Like, I think, like, that's the more immediate, you know, it's like Jordan Peterson says, you know, clean your room. Like, that is that's the closest thing we can do for ourselves. You know, that helps our neighbor, just cleaning our room, cleaning up our own lives, and then help it going across the street. But then it gets more and more complicated. And I feel like I want the direction to go that way rather than skipping over all that. So, you know, with the little button. But I think like we can organize, and I do like the sentiment, the Barack Obama sentiment of community organizing. It's just that he brought it to the lunch lady land aspect of it, you know, like bringing it to a national level. I like starting with, what can I do here with my neighbor here, my community? What can I organize? You know, what kind of help can I organize for this neighborhood, this town, this county, you know, and maybe eventually the state, but not the nation, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it kind of goes back to the idea of when we have a government that is only focused on, you know, what it was originally designed to, and you get down to the local communities, state governments, you know, like people yell and complain about separation of church and state, but you know, so they're like, well, that's why the church doesn't do these things anymore. Well, that's a bad interpretation of what separation of church and state means. Because really, you think about history of America, it used to be that churches started the hospitals, churches started the charitable foundations that fed the poor in their neighborhood. And now government.
That's an important thing I left out. All right.
Yeah.
Like I talked about my community church, our church.
Our church.
Thank you.
And now church is delegated to like a country club, and we go there and we worship on Sunday mornings, and we feel good about
Shouldn't be.
ourselves. And then, yeah, it shouldn't be that way. Our church should be the central hub of the community. And that's not to push a religion on that community. That's more just the mandate of the Christian walk to go out and love your neighbor.
Amen.
So unfortunately, that's not
good.
That's not how our society is structured right now. And I think there has to be this, we can work from within, like you said, clean your room, take care of your immediate surroundings. But at some point, there also has to be a working in from the outside, where the government is slowly decreasing its responsibilities that it shouldn't have had in the first place.
But you're like doing this, slowly decreasing.
Slowly decreasing while the inside is slowly increasing. It's like, and so it's hard. So it's like, yes, you have to voice your public opinion through voting, but you also have to do the daily walk of loving your neighbor in your immediate surrounding. So,
amen.
Yeah,
I think we pretty much agree, and this has been helpful. It's been helpful for me to talk through this with you and to hear your perspective. It's I definitely appreciate your push to be considerate, and I think it definitely has. James enjoyed. We had Dave Roberts has a thumbs up, heart, and peace. What would that be? Yeah, good. Love you. Peace out. And then James says, enjoyed the discussion. Well, great. Thanks, James. But yeah, I enjoyed it. And, we've got an hour long.
Yeah, we said what, 20, 30 minutes?
It's no, 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast, but so we haven't got that long.
No.
It's been good.
Well, we didn't do our intro, so we should do this just for fun.
Yeah.
You ready? Do
it! Come on! Do it now!
All right, Judah. It's been fun, man.
All right, brother.
I'll talk to you later.
Sounds good. Let's do this again soon.
All right.
Sooner than a year.
Yes, absolutely.